Welcome, dear listeners, to the Speak and Flow podcast, where we dive into unique strategies to help you and your team achieve maximum potential and flow, even when the stakes are high and the pressure is on. And I have the best person to help guide us through this. His name is Kevin Oden. He's the CEO of Kevin D. Oden and Associates. He's an advisory board member for Theon Technology, and he's also been the head of operational risk and compliance for Wells Fargo. Welcome, Kevin.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. We're going to dive into such a rich conversation around who to be careful for, what kind of people to look for, and how do we protect ourselves when we deal with there's so many different people, so many types of people out there. So we just kind of want to dive into that conversation today. And before we get into that, can you share, you lead such high profile risk projects for clients. And so what makes you excited today?
So, look, I get excited every day I'm working on, a project, or most days it's multiple projects. Um, Today we're, gearing up for a new engagement with a new client who's been working through some regulatory issues. Regulatory issues are certainly something that almost every financial institution is familiar with to some degree or another. This one has been working through some regulatory issues for nearly a year now. So we're going to come in and we're going to try to help them solve their problems. We're not going to try, we're going to help them solve their problems.
Yes, yes. And so with the new administration, has the regulatory issues been even more tightened? Has it been
So
loosened?
that's a great question. It's really the jury's out right now on that. Certainly, the CFPB um, has has loosened constraints or loosened regulatory oversight in many respects. It's unclear what's happening with the Federal Reserve Board, the OCC, et cetera. For now, it appears that it's, other than the CFPB, it's regulation as usual. So if you have an outstanding issue with one of the regulators, you better resolve it. So where that goes in the next 3.5 years still remains to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah. So any financial institution who is concerned or unsure of how to deal with these policies, compliance, you are a consultant to them. What are some of the things that they look for or to be wary of when they're looking for a risk consultant? Like,
Yeah. So I just mentioned a firm that we're about to engage, and without mentioning the name of the firm or the name of the organization that they brought in, but they brought in a big name organization to help them resolve their regulatory issues, and literally. After the regulators came back in to see where they were at the supposed halfway mark, they basically said, "This is garbage." So we're um, we're going to come in and we're going to get them on the right path to resolving their regulatory issues. But to the heart of your question, a lot of these big name organizations, and even some of the smaller ones, they send their big named person in day one, and um, that person sort of goes away and or makes appearances infrequently. But the people that are doing the work
mhm,
are generally junior individuals. Maybe they're
mhm,
2 years out of school, even if it's an MBA. If
mhm.
you haven't worked through regulatory issues in the
Yeah,
past, if you're not very familiar with the banking
yeah,
environment, it's going to be difficult for you to understand how to put together a roadmap
right.
for resolving a lot of these issues. It's this, and we don't do that. The people on our team, in some cases, have decades worth of experience, but most of them have 10 years worth of real experience. So they've had to carry those regulatory burdens on their back physically and get them lifted off. Um, so that's the difference between, even though we're a small institution, a small bank, I'm sorry, a small risk consulting firm, we just have that experience. It's a part of our DNA.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's invaluable, right? Because they're getting if they're a smaller financial institution or a medium-sized financial institution, they are getting the depth and breadth of your experiences, your team's experiences and knowledge,
That,
having,
that's
like you said, carried the burden of these regulations on their backs and
Exactly.
overcome them.
And that's exactly right, especially when you're talking about smaller institutions. There you may have, a CRO, or a CFO or CEO who has experience, um, with that institution, but actually hasn't seen the broad breadth of, regulatory oversight because sometimes they've grown up with their institution. They've seen it go from a 700, $800 million asset to, a billion to 2 billion to 3 billion, but they haven't, and that regulatory oversight increases with the size of your assets under management as well as with the growing
Yeah,
complexity of your firm.
right,
And
right,
so
right,
if you haven't been there before, you haven't done it before,
right.
you'd like to bring in somebody, and have the advice of somebody who has done it before.
Right, right. I mean, and this brings me to just a deeper level question. So it sounds like you say these large institutions are coming in, they have the big name, consulting firms have this big
Yeah.
name, and they may be perceived as the best, but then they bring in and they're bringing in lower level or not inexperienced, not as experienced people
Yeah.
actually do the job. So at a smaller scale, can you think about a time when you actually met somebody who's coming in and they may be perceived as, I know it all, or they portray themselves as I know it all, and then actually when you dig a little deeper, they don't. They may blow up, they have bad behavior. How can you spot them early on? I mean, you probably met a lot of people
Oh,
now,
I've
and
I've
so
I've lived through that experience myself,
yeah,
unfortunately, where, again, we hired a named firm, to help us years ago. And this is, nearly a decade ago, if not more now. But I've lived through that experience where basically, um, they start to give advice, they start to give, documents, etc. And you read through them and you get a sense that, well, one, I wouldn't do this. Second, it flies in the face of what we know is regulatory oversight because
mhm.
there's a body of, so you can spot them pretty quickly
Yeah, what are the
if
signs?
you
What
have
are
experience, if
Uh-huh.
you have experience.
Got it. But what if,
Um,
yeah, that's interesting.
you
Right.
know,
Yeah. Well, what if someone
but if you don't
doesn't?
spot them, if you don't have experience, you're going to have a difficult time spotting them. And, because like I said, for smaller institutions, they're relying on these individuals to
Yeah.
more or less educate them.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
Right. So,
So maybe have someone else with you
yeah. I
who
mean,
does
and
know.
so it's, like I said, if you have experience or if you have people on your team that have deep experience, then those people, you can spot these individuals. It's when you don't have, and especially these smaller institutions where in some cases, in particular businesses, you may be a one-person shop.
Yeah.
You may have to run a whole division
Right.
by yourself,
Right.
more or less. Um, and it becomes very difficult to maintain that level of expertise in-house
Right.
because as soon as people, in some cases, get that expertise, they look to go to a bigger firm where they can get more money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, let's talk about your team and how your team can kind of support them.
Yeah, so my team, I've been very fortunate. with assembling my team. So just about everyone on my team I've worked with for a decade or more. So I've been able to gather them from my past employers, as well as along the way, working with them in various other positions. So when you think about the people on my team, I have one individual. So this is um, emblematic of just about everyone on the team, but just to pick on one particular individual, he's worked at the Federal Reserve Board, he's worked at Fannie Mae, PhD in economics. He's worked at Wells Fargo. He was a private consultant for a while. He was the CRO of a small firm. I've known him for nearly 20 years and worked with him prior to this for, 7 or 8 years, directly. So, when you have people like that, you know,
Yeah.
they, you know, they can walk the walk, you know,
Yeah.
and, um, they've seen how to work through issues. They've seen how to work with various regulators, whether it be the Federal Reserve Board, the FDIC, the OCC. And in most of our team's case, not everyone, but most of our team's case, they've also worked with overseas regulators, whether it be OSFI in Canada, or the EBA in Europe as well. So lots of familiarity with regulatory context, as well, and not just regulatory context from reading, but from actually having to live and breathe it every day.
Right, right. And what are the difficult conversations that you need to have when it comes to regulation?
Yeah, well, there are really the most difficult conversations I have are with clients that are skirting, or let's say skating on the boundary, or just below the boundary of sort of regulatory requirements. Um, as a financial institution, should you be well above that regulatory boundary? Absolutely not. It'd be crazy, because your goal is to return, profits to investors, and
Mhm.
uh, protect your clients, in the most efficient way as possible.
Mhm.
So I'm never going to advocate for anyone to go far and above the
Right.
regulatory requirements. But my toughest conversations are when I walk in and I see people sort of just below that boundary.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I have to tell them, look, I can't tell you to move above. Can't
Mhm.
tell you have to change this, fix that, do this, but I would recommend it because
Mhm.
I've seen what happens to some financial institutions, not all,
Mhm.
that are in your position, that are missing this piece of the regulatory guidance, that are missing that function, that's required. Um, and sometimes these institutions get fined. Um, they get put in the penalty box, but some others don't,
Mhm.
because it really depends. Um, I always tell clients that regulations are universal, but examinations are always local, because an examiner needs to come in,
Mhm.
and apply those regulations, and they all apply them a little bit differently. So
Right,
so you may be fine. You may
right,
be absolutely fine, but I
right,
need to tell you what I see
right,
relative to, the written rule. So,
right.
so those
How
are
do
the
you,
toughest conversations.
yeah, how do you prepare for it?
Oh,
Yes.
it's simple. I fret and moan, and and then and
Oh,
then
man.
and then I get my gumption up, and it's you never really get used to it. It's but
Yeah,
but you have to be honest. It's a matter of being honest with your clients. You
yeah.
know, it would be easy for me to say, yeah, everything's fine, but then that would damage our reputation, my reputation,
Mhm.
if and when the regulators came in
Yeah.
and or internal audit even said, look, this is not right. This is not working.
Right.
So I've got to be honest, and sometimes to be perfectly candid, if I'm handing over a written document to them outlining that I've this goes to the second part of the toughest piece of the conversation. Um, sometimes they'll say, please don't put this in here, this recommendation in there. And I will tell
Mm.
them I have to, you know.
Wow.
Now, again, you can choose to not do it,
Right.
but I have to put it in the document because
Right.
if someone comes in and sees our work,
Right.
they're going to,
Right.
they're going to judge it based on, on the written regulations.
Uh-huh.
And they're going to say, this guy's firm is horrible. They miss
Right.
some obvious things.
Right.
Yeah.
And then do they comply? Are they
Oh, they
still,
have to.
they
Yeah.
have
I
to?
said,
Yeah.
this is the document. I'm going to keep a copy of it.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. That is tough. That is
but it's,
tough.
look, that doesn't happen frequently.
All right.
It does happen probably once a year,
Mm-hmm.
if sometimes twice, but that's sort of a one time a year thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, I know, I mean, it sounds like your approach that just to be honest, yeah, and just have those conversations. It
You
goes
have
a
to have
long
the
way.
tough conversation.
Yeah, to have the
Yeah.
tough conversations, even though they're tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. And I think that, I mean, I can see where you're so successful and why you're so successful, just because you have all this experience, you have an amazing team, and you just having that also approachability about you to be able to have those candid conversations.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's like an open door to, yes, even though we're going to have a difficult conversation, I still feel at least I can have it with you, right? And we can talk about things. Uh-huh.
That's reinforcement. That's good. That's my next tough conversation. You're building up confidence for me.
Yes, there you go. Well, I really appreciate it, Kevin. So as we wrap up, can you share with us what is that one leadership golden takeaway that you want the audience to remember?
It's very simple. The Every day you lead by example, whether it's a positive example or a negative example. Leaders have to realize when you walk into the door, you're leading by example. So
Mm.
you want to make those examples as positive as possible for your team, so that they too can lead in a positive way. And it doesn't mean that every day is going to be rose colored and beautiful. You have the tough conversations too, but you're setting an example whether you know it or not, as a leader every moment, every minute of every day.
Right. I agree. I agree. And so the best leadership trait is to, right, lead by example, be aware
Lead
of
by
how your
example,
neighbors
bring your best
in your
self
best
to
self.
work every day.
Yeah. And if it's not, then it's okay. But at least you
Yeah,
communicate that, you let people know.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, open communication, good positive communication, is a part of leading by example, right? So,
Right.
you know, there should be no surprises at work, from a leadership perspective.
Right. Right. And people will go the mile with you, even if you're not having a good day,
Yeah,
but at least they know who you are at the heart of who you are.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's, if I had to have one leadership takeaway, that would be it.
That would be it. Yeah. Because we've all had those leaders where it was just so, it's unpleasant to be around them.
I've lived through a leader like that, and short-lived. I ended up leaving after 3 months because this leader literally would come out of his office every day and find someone to berate,
That's
or humiliate in front of everyone. And that was sort of like his goal. And then he'd go back into his office, slam the door, and um, so after about 3 months, I decided I can't work like this, can't live like
that is
this.
Good for
Yes.
you. Good for you, right? That's a
Yeah.
leadership trait too, to know exactly when it is to just cut it off.
You just cut it off and move on.
Right. I mean, that does not, it's horrible to live in that year. Hopefully yeah, he's learned or he's evolved from that
I,
place.
I heard he was fired about a
Oh,
year later. So
sometimes we got to learn the hard way.
exactly.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. It was really fun. I learned a lot about risk management or just with understanding how to look out for different risk consultants and just the different people that are out there in general, right? Who are portraying themselves as one way, but really somebody else. And it behooves us to really take a moment to take a step back, really dig deep, get curious, maybe bring in some other people to help us
Yep.
decipher what to do. And if you're a financial institution and you're looking for some financial risk consulting, compliance consulting, I encourage you to reach out to Kevin D. Oden and Associates. We'll have his contact information down below in the comments below. And really appreciate you, Kevin, so much.
I appreciate the invite and thank you, Melinda.
Thank you. And thank you, audience, for being here. I trust that you got your leadership golden takeaway for the day. I encourage you to implement it. And remember, anytime you have a conversation with somebody, you also have an opportunity to connect, to inspire, and to make a positive difference in your communities. Thank you again. Until next time, I'm your sister in flow. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining the conversation today. Are you curious on how you measure up with your ability to speak in flow? Come grab my free self-assessment at https://speakinflow.com/assessment. And I'll see you on the other side.